Right, so if you watched my previous video, I showed the DeSoto finally starting again. The paint is coming out really nicely as well, I think. And, see, very, very smooth, very mirror show car finish. Lots of dust outside though, but oh well. So anyways, after checking, following the wires and distributor clamp, you want to, so if you know the ignition coil is working and you know that you have electricity going to the wires, remember the ignition, when you turn on the ignition switch, it connects power to this wire here. The other wires just connect to the distributor and then to ground. So one way you can notice, one indicator that the you are actually getting electricity going to the coil is that when you turn the ignition on, the ammeter, I'll show you that in a second, will move. It'll show it'll move. So just watch when I turn the key, it'll move. So right now it's at 0. See that? Off, ignition on, off and on. There we go. Turn it off. Starter button there, by the way. There's the ignition key. So that's the ammeter. And the reason it will move is because the ignition coil, which is a transformer, it'll use up electricity. So if you leave the car in the on position, this might actually get hot depending on which position on the distributor it is in. If it's in a spark position, it will get hot. Okay, so but to make sure, you probably want to either disconnect the distributor wire and touch it against something, see if sparks come out. But be careful, because I got a really nasty shock the other day. It won't kill you, but it'll give you a nasty shock. If this wire isn't so good, which is the case here, it's not so good. So normally, if it's well insulated, you can hold it here without receiving a shock. But if it's broken somewhere, then it will go through the broken electricity will leak through the brake and go to your hand. So I know that the distributor was working because of the nasty shock that I got. I know that, the ignition coil was working from the nasty shock that I got. So I opened up the distributor, and one of the most common problems, sure enough, one of the most common problems you'll have is that there. As you can see, this ignition coil, distributor cap is missing the middle part. And this middle part, there's supposed to be a graphite rod, and I'll show you that. Yeah, there's supposed to be a graphite rod, and as you can see, this one is missing. So, and as you can see, there's rust there, there's a spring too, and it's one of those things that just happens. This is probably the original distributor cap from 1947, and I wish there was a way you could repair this. Just, in an emergency situation, I could repair this. I could just stick in a pencil or a wire or just a brass rod. That would be really nice in the middle there, so that anything that would conduct would work here. So the ignition coil goes to this middle part, which goes to through this carbon rod here, and goes to the top of the distributor rotor, which then rotates and transfers that spark, that electrical electricity, to each of the spark plugs. It goes from here to there. So each one of these is for a spark plug. Normally they have, these distributor caps, they have a number so that you know which position, which you can have a starting point for reference for which ignition wire or spark plug wire goes where. This one, I don't really think it does, or if it does, it's not really clear. So there's a mark there, B with an infinity symbol, and there's a number 6 there, and indeed, this is where number 6 cylinder goes. But let me just show you the what the a new distributor cap looks like. This is what a good functional distributor cap looks like. You can see there's that little carbon rod in the middle. Oh, and by the way, this is from the flathead on the 1963 Rambler American. And in an emergency situation, it would fit the DeSoto, believe me or not. It's not a direct fit because the clamps don't really match, but it would, the diameter does fit perfectly. And if I was in an emergency, I would not use this without a problem. The distributor rotor, on the other hand, is a direct fit, and you can easily interchange them with the 1963 Rambler American, and I bet you most 6-cylinder cars. Just thought that would be interesting. So one of the first things you'd probably check is the most common problem is this here, and these distributors, like most things in these cars, they're made of cast iron and steel, brass parts. The only cap itself is plastic, but it's not it's not really plastic. I think it's called Bakelite. But anyways, they're very durable. So the only thing that you probably break in a distributor is this middle part here. So probably one of the first things I check is that. Now, the other issue that I had is normally if you're going to replace the cap, you'd probably mark where the number 1 spark plug wire goes to. Reason being is, yeah, you think, okay, I know what the order is. Here on the engine it says 153624. However, you don't know the starting point of that order. So you could have the engine in a different position, in firing position, let's say number 3 piston. And then you put the number 1 piston there in the firing order. Even though the firing order is correct, the position relative to the engine is not. So the engine would not start, or it would at least run very badly. I don't think it would start at all, but in some cases I've heard of people saying that you could destroy an engine that way, although that's highly unlikely. It would probably just not start because the valves would be at the wrong positions. Okay, so that's why you'd normally want to mark the wires before you move them to make things easier. If by chance you don't mark them and your assistants remove them, it was my fault. I didn't tell them not to mark it first, but so they ended up removing the spark plug wires. So I no longer knew what the correct position was. So fortunately on the distributor cap, that's why it's important here. Here's the reason why I need to have attention to detail. So if you look around it, right here, there's a ridge. Everywhere else on the distributor, it's just smooth. And over here you have a ridge, and that's there for a reason. That ridge matches on the distributor itself. So that means, so on the distributor cap, that ridge goes onto the distributor so that it's in the correct location, which happens to be about at left. So this hole, as you can see, this distributor has a little hole, and that faces up at a bit of an angle like that. So at first, took me a while to notice that, but that solves only one of our problems. It doesn't tell us which piston or which spark plug goes to which distributor cap point. In some distributor caps, you have them numbered, which is the case for the Rambler American. It says 1, so that you know which spark plug goes where. Fortunately, on the DeSoto, you go to the end of the electrical section. This is for the S10 model. This is for the S11 model. And right on the distributor diagram there, it shows you where the wires go. And you see some of these diagrams on other models, they're not to scale, they're not actual representation, but in this case it is. So as you can see, according to that diagram, number 3 would be this one here, sorry, number 5, and then number 3 would be this one here, and this one here is number 6. The one on the right is number 6, and but as you can see, there's not really a mark there. So anyways, I have to check to make sure. This is why it's useful to have a manual. So I went to the electrical section, which talks about the distributor, and it gives you the instructions on how to time the engine. And over here, so to set or adjust timing to specified standards, firing position, do this, use indicator, whatever, which is this one here. Install timing, plug hole over piston at rear of engine. And this is what really caught me. I'm used to most cars being timed relative to piston number 1. However, this here, with the DeSoto 1947 DeSoto, it's timed relative to piston number 6. That's why it says here, at rear of engine, as shown in figure 11. So figure 11 just shows the gauge for timing. In my case, I'm just timing it by feeler gauge, but at the rear of the engine, right there, as you can see, there's a plug, and that goes directly over piston number 6. So although the manual does not tell you it's actually piston number 6, it just says rear of engine, there's only one place where you could install that tool, because there's only one plug that's small, and it's directly over the piston, and this plug here. You don't really need to remove it, but so this engine, but it just goes to show that this engine is timed relative to piston number 6. So piston number 6 at top dead center. So that's what really confused me the other day. And we finally solved it. So you line up the marks. That plug is really useful if you can't see the marks on the crankshaft pulley, which is usually the case. So you can mechanically know that piston number 6 is at the top. You just poke a wire in through that hole. Just be careful not to leave it there. So I removed that plug, made sure sure enough, piston number 6 was the top dead center. And then I put I looked at the distributor cap and located where the rotor was at, and I started with piston, and I put spark plug wire number 6 in that position. Once again, similar to the Rambler, there's 2 positions where it could be at. However, from the diagram here, you can know which position is the correct one, which is towards the top. So it's at a bit of an angle like that, the rotor. But just in case you're wondering, I'll show you in just a second. But if you got it wrong, you just have to reconnect the wires in the different top dead center. So I'll just zoom in there for you in just a second. So these are the wrong spark plugs wires for this car. The spark plugs are correct though. Here's number 6. And as you can see, there's number 6 right there. It's actually slightly different to what's on the manual, but there's piston number 6. So hopefully this helps somebody out there. It's basically the number 6 spark plug goes to the first terminal on the distributor cap that's on the left of the clamp here, or to the hole, if you will, looking from the front of the car, or rather the side of the car, to the top of the distributor. This distributor rotates clockwise, different to the Rambler that rotates counterclockwise. So here's number 6, then 2, 4, and then 1. 1 is at the very bottom. 5, and then 3, and then there you have it. So hopefully this helps somebody out there. I imagine this applies to other cars of that era. Later on, until today, all cars are timed relative to piston number 1 at top dead center. But once again, on the DeSoto, it's relative to piston number 6 at TDC.